just to interject in the script, my daughter Mabel loves the word bumhole, and we don't let her use it very often because it's slightly rude, and I hadn't realised you'd slipped it in. So great.
Just careful.
Right, anyway.
Hello and welcome to Who Moved the Tortoise, a podcast about the science and wildlife films that have inspired people. I'm Kate Dooley.
And I'm Alex Hemingway.
In each episode, we invite someone from the world of science or the media to share the thing that inspired them most.
It can be anything: fiction, comedy, documentary, animation, whatever. The only rule at Tortoise HQ is that it has to have some kind of science or wildlife content.
This time we're talking to VFX assistant producer Jay Balamurugan. After studying biological sciences at Lancaster University, Jay joined the Science Communications course at Imperial.
She's helped create the stunning visual effects in BBC series Earth, Your Body Uncovered, and the new Walking With Dinosaurs.
In the name of accurate VFX, she spent 2 weeks in the Azores method acting as a baby triceratops while being watched by a cruise ship full of tourists. She spent 3 days in a cave in Borneo knee-deep in guano, that's science for bat poo, and she's had to work out in photoreal VFX just how puckered to make the bumhole of the first thing to ever evolve a bumhole.
Jay's choice for the film or TV show that inspired her is the 1999 BBC series Walking With Dinosaurs. So how difficult was it to choose something as your inspiration?
Not particularly difficult. Walking with Dinosaurs is the reason I do what I do. That initial series, I came across it when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. I mean, the first episode even premiered, I think, when I was like 3, something like that. And it shaped everything about what I love to this day. It shaped my love of storytelling, my love of science. It's the reason I went into academia. It's the reason I then went into TV. It wasn't hard to choose when something has had that strong of an impact on me.
So it premiered on the 4th of October 1999, the first episode of the series, which by weird coincidence was the night before I left home to go to university for the very first time. What were you doing then? How old were you? Were you seeing it first time around, or were you catching it a little bit later?
So I grew up in Malaysia, and I think the 3rd episode premiered on my 3rd birthday. It's a very fun little coincidence. But I didn't encounter Walking with Dinosaurs until maybe about a year or two later. For a bit of context, I don't think we had BBC at the time. In Malaysia, I don't know whether BBC was particularly available. But, and there's a little fun fact, early 2000s Malaysia was the biggest producer of bootleg media in the world. I found that out very recently. And 4 or 5 year old me was taken to this night market by my family. And I remember standing next to my dad at the time while he sort of flipped through various CDs. I could barely look over the little shelf. And the thing that I picked out of the bunch was a CD of Walking with Dinosaurs. I can not quite remember the cover of it, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was blue sky with a pterosaur soaring through it, and it says Walking with Dinosaurs on it. It looked really cool. Obviously, little me was going to just immediately grab it and be like, I want this. And I was, 4. I didn't understand the concept of commerce, so I just walked out of the shop with it. Thankfully, my mom was on the other side, and she was like, no, go back. And I think at that point, they couldn't not buy it because there's a very angry shopkeeper who was very nearly burgled by this toddler. So, yeah, they bought it. And funnily enough, it wasn't even the full series. Like I said, bootleg media, not particularly reliable. It had 1 episode on it at the time. I think it was the 4th episode, Giant of the Skies, if I'm not mistaken. Again, 4 years old, can't remember everything perfectly. But It was that, and it was the making of special, which is the 45 minutes that comes at the end, where they show you all the little, ins and outs, how they built the animatronics, how they did the VFX at the time. And that was it. I was hooked. I couldn't, there was no going back. I was obsessed with it. I begged my parents for more of this. And they had no idea how to get a hold of more. Like, it was very hard to get like that sort of thing in, again, early 2000s Malaysia. So I think it was only a year, maybe another few years at least, before my folks got a hold of the rest to give to me as a present. And I still have those CDs to this day. I recently visited my home in Malaysia for the first time in like well over half a decade. And I found it again. It's still there. It's been collecting dust, but it's very much still there intact. So yeah, that's the story of how I came across it, and there was really no going back. It set me off on this very specific journey.
In life, he was the most magnificent beast ever to take to the wing. He ruled the skies supreme, flying far and wide over the lands of the dinosaurs. This is the story of the last journey this giant ever made.
Do we know why kids are so enraptured by dinosaurs? Because it's something that I've noticed with my own child, and I'm sure you're the same, Kate. And it's interesting that you came to it at such a young age. There is something about dinosaurs that kids find fascinating from a zero starting point. And I wonder if anyone has any inkling as to why that might be.
I mean, they're fantastical, aren't they?
Yeah. I think it's this idea that they are very much like the myths and legends you tell kids. You read about dragons in fairy tale books and stuff, but they're real. You can go out there, you can find their bones. They were here. There's something about that, this idea that these things that were larger than life were around. They were here, and you can learn about them. There's a lot of that, I think, to it. Yeah, and I think dinosaurs are sort of like, because of that they're sort of the ultimate gateway to science. Dinosaurs, things like space, there's this sort of, the wonder of things you can't quite reach is really quite appealing for children especially. And I think it's timeless. It's never going to go out of fashion. Every kid's going to love dinosaurs when they first learn about them. And there are quite a few who never grow out of that, which is, I think, quite nice.
This reminds me of something David Dugan said to us about the Royal Institution Christmas lectures, which is that we don't know everything about them because they're not here. I think as you get a bit older, you realise they're not here. We're still finding out more and more about them. You know that actually, if you wanted to, you could try and add to that body of knowledge. There's still more to be discovered. There's unanswered questions. So I think that makes it extra exciting for the slightly older kids.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the spirit of discovery, I think, is strong in paleontology, because you can learn more. It's similar again with astronomy. I think there's these two ends of the spectrum where you're looking really far out into space to learn more, but you can also look really far back in time to learn more, because there's always going to be more to learn. A lot of people in the paleontology world say that we are very much in a golden age of dinosaur discovery. We're learning new things weekly, if not daily. It's just new science, new discoveries, and it is just absurdly cool, some of the things we know about nowadays. When I was growing up, all the dinosaur books said, oh, we don't know what color they were. Now we know the color of like good dozen species at least. It just keeps adding. And the fact you can go out there and add to the body of knowledge is pretty amazing.
And you can do it at home. Like, you can do a little fossil walk. You can go to the Jurassic Coast, find your own fossils. My kid asked to do that literally the other day. And so, yeah, you can do it at home. It's not, and the same with space as well. You can do it at home as well as know that there are so many more levels to it and discoveries to be made. It's such a rich subject. And because Walking with Dinosaurs has just been remade, and you were part of that team, you've come full circle.
Yes.
So kind of watching it, working on it now, how did you get involved with it?
It's quite a funny story as to how I got involved with the new Walking with Dinosaurs. I was working on Earth at the time, which was also a series looking quite far back into deep time, but with a much more global focus on sort of geology and how that interacts with the biosphere, that sort of thing. And I loved it to bits. That's the series I'm still tremendously proud of. We did some really incredible stuff there.
What we've missed, how we fell in love with our own abyss. Never close enough.
But while I was working on Earth, we have monthly drinks here, where we go out as a science unit collectively and we chat to each other. And at these drinks, development exec Tom Scott pulls me aside and says, "What is that on your arm?" Pointing at the tattoo I have on my right arm. And I say, "Oh, that's a Spinosaurus skull." He then says, "We're making a show about that." And the idea that I'll be working on a dinosaur show was something I thought, yeah, maybe someday, maybe when I'm have been in the industry a couple decades or something, sure. Didn't expect it to be quite so immediate, but I built up a fairly good skill set in terms of bringing extinct animals to life in VFX, extinct worlds to life. And aside from that, I've also sort of built up a skill set of understanding these animals and understanding their anatomy and reconstructing them artistically as well. So it kind of all fit very nicely. As soon as I had the chance to start contributing, I very much did. I couldn't be stopped. It's very, very exciting for me.
So for someone who might be a listener that might be familiar with the original series, how would you describe the new series in the context of the old one? What are the differences? What are the similarities?
The big similarity the two series carry across is that while they are, shows about dinosaurs, what they really are single character narratives. They are dramas following single individual animals for the most part. In the original series, sometimes it would be a baby Diplodocus. You follow it as it goes through the challenges of growing up in a predator-filled landscape. Or you're following this giant pterosaur, Ornithocheirus, as it makes this last final migration across the world in search of a mate. And these are all stories that are very, very relatable. Anyone can understand the sort of coming of age story or the, fighting for love story. These ideas are very universal. And we wanted to carry that across in this new one as well. So each of the episodes in the new series, while the format is fairly different, still carries across the single individual going through a really dramatic moment in their lives.
Instinct is telling the Ornithocheirus that it is time to move on. He must leave these shores and return to his breeding site in Europe, on the other side of the world. For this giant of the sky, it will be the last great flight he ever makes. What he is about to undertake is the most astounding journey in the animal kingdom. From the shores of the great southern continent, he will travel to North America, cross the Atlantic Seaway, and fly on to the islands which mark where Europe will one day be formed. Spread out below him will be the majesty and spectacle of a world ruled by dinosaurs.
Where the differences come in is that while the original was filmed very much like a natural history documentary, as if you sent a time-traveling camera crew back then to just observe these animals, we're now intersplicing the episodes with sort of footage of paleontologists unearthing these animals themselves. I think that's quite a nice thing, because now it's not just that we're celebrating the animals themselves, we're celebrating the science of actually unearthing them and seeing their actual bones come out the ground. I think that's so important nowadays. Science has very much been in this realm of being slightly eroded over time because of the kind of wider state of the world. But seeing actual science being conducted like this, I think helps really bridge these quite fantastical and, I mean, otherwise really beautiful VFX sequences. But it helps make them feel a lot more real, because you know for a fact that was an individual animal that was in the ground, because you're looking at their bones. And I think that really does make quite a bit of a difference.
I totally agree with you. I love how the paleontologists are kind of unpiecing clues as they find things, and they'll discuss something, and then it will have these beautiful transitions into the graphics, and you then go to this animal, and then you're like, oh, I understand why you're showing me this story. I understand why this animal is going through this event, or, you know, whatever it is. I thought it was done really well. I think that, I don't know if money came into it. Like, the first Walking with Dinosaurs was the most expensive TV show ever made. It cost £6.1 million to produce the original one. So every minute it cost over £37,000.
It was expensive.
I mean, that's huge, and that's in the Guinness
expensive.
World Book of Records. Yeah. So I can also see why they wanted to do some other filming that was slightly cheaper, but it's so beautifully done.
It is quite interesting, because if you actually look at the original series and compare it to this one, there isn't a huge difference in minutage of VFX animals on screen, but it has changed quite drastically in terms of cost. For example, VFX animals are still incredibly expensive, but it is sort of, you get a little bit more bang for your buck these days in how much you spend on them. Whereas certain things like animatronics are just more really expensive nowadays. While at the time they were used as sort of we can't get that close to an animal because the VFX technology isn't there for us to get that close to get that detail. So you use an animatronic animal. We can sort of do that now with VFX. To instead use an animatronic in its place would be very expensive.
Wow, so that's the big difference. That's really interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
And how many of the characters that we see are off-the-shelf models, or is it all built from scratch?
Every animal you see in the new Walking with Dinosaurs, every one of our hero characters, they are all built from scratch. This was a fairly long and involved process. I like to tell people that I looked after the animals. That was sort of my role on the series. I really worked across the creature creation process from start to finish as much as I could. It takes a village to bring these animals to life. There are untold numbers of VFX artists working behind the scenes, paleontological consultants, and just a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that are poured into this. And I try to kind of keep abreast of that entire process to make sure these animals are brought to life in as true to their lives a way as I can. Because, I don't know, it's a strange thing to say, but I feel like they are owed that level of respect. They were here, right? And to try and bring them to life in a way that doesn't represent them accurately, I feel like it's doing a disservice to them. So the process is extensive. We start off by creating these very, very hefty documents, sometimes 60 to 80 pages long, that we called our dinosaur Bibles for each animal.
Wow.
These are compendiums of information, starting literally from the skeletal anatomy of the animal to the musculature, to the skin, the feathers, things like how big are their scales, what do their toenails look like, how do they move, do we have trackway information we can rely on? All of it underpinned by the science. It was a labor of love. I actually really enjoyed putting those together, despite the fact they took forever to do, and despite the fact they were very, very time consuming. But they were a joy. And we spoke to our paleontologists throughout this process the whole time. And they were having a great time too, because it was like, I guess in a way, it's sort of like putting together a research paper, but slightly more fun. And for some of these animals, because some of the animals we've worked with are fairly obscure, they're not very well known, these Bibles ended up being pretty much the biggest compendium of this information available anywhere, which I was very proud of. And then we send this over to the VFX house. We first have to kind of make everything essentially we put in all the science. Now we have to take out all the scientific wording and make it as easily understandable as possible, so that when you hand this over to an artist, they can build these animals as clearly as possible. And then we go on a really long back and forth process. Like they'll send us the first iteration of the model. We'll say, that looks great, but can you extend the tail here? Or can you make the eye a little smaller? Can you do this? And then we go back and forth. Then we go into texturing, where they start to give the animal color and texture. So I worked internally here to come up with various color concepts and things like that. And again, back and forth. And then we start to make them move. And that's a really fun part, because you get to see them actually take their first steps in a way. And I love that to bits, because it shows you that all the work you're putting in is going somewhere. And again, back and forth for a very, very long time until we get it right. But we had to do this for all 20 plus of our animals. Some obviously feature a lot more than others. There are a couple of animals you only see for 1 or 2 shots. But there's a lot of animals which feature for the entire duration of a program, sometimes multiple programs. So we spent a lot of time making sure that they held up as best as possible in these various scenarios. It was arduous, it was long, but I loved it. It was really, really fun. It's a great, great joy bringing these things to life. And I think it does show these are some of the most scientifically rigorous models, but also the ones that feel most like animals. When you watch the series, I think you get that feeling from them sometimes when you look at them and you think, oh wow, that moves. It may feel unfamiliar in the sense that we don't have any animals that look like that, but it also feels like you're watching an animal.
Absolutely, I would agree. I totally felt that watching it. They looked like, when I'm watching it, I know in my head it's CGI, but there's nothing about how the animal moved or was that I felt looked out of place. Whereas watching the original series, you're watching it and you're going, oh, the CGI, yes, it's old, but I can see what they were trying to do. But it can't stand the test of time, CGI, can it? It just can't, because it continually gets better and better.
No, absolutely. That's why when I watch the original, I always put it on like a slightly lower resolution, like 480p, because then it still looks fantastic, because that's what it was made for.
And that's how that's how we would have watched it.
You would have watched it in like standard definition, right? No, it wouldn't have been in HD. And if you watch it it still holds up really well. But
That's genius.
But if you put it up to HD, suddenly you're like, oh, because it wasn't meant for that.
In just a few days, he reaches the southern tip of North America. Below him, a column of iguanodons stretches along a beach, grazing the edge of a dense forest. 1,000 tons of dinosaur are on the move. Hundreds of mouths are searching for a fresh place to satisfy their enormous appetites.
Do you get a sense, like, what was it about it that young you just loved? Is it just the fantastical animals? Was it the storytelling? Do you have a sense of what really drew you in when you were small?
I think it was it was a combination of all of them, but the storytelling, I think, was the big one. It's one thing seeing these animals, right? And I obviously love that, because you could pick up a dinosaur kids book in the shops and I would stare at that for ages. But I think it's the storytelling that really got me. It's the fact that you can watch these animals live out their lives in these really dramatic, intricate ways that it gives you a window onto these things that you don't often get, not even with modern animals, if you're not as familiar with like natural history, which I wasn't at the time, and which is quite interesting, actually. This was probably my first foray into natural history, not even, things like Planet Earth or anything like that. So it was that sort of like privilege of seeing a story unfold that you feel like you wouldn't otherwise get to see, which I thought was, I think that's what really got me.
And it was very dramatic, wasn't it? It's very like Jurassic Park. It's definitely taking those kind of filmic tropes. Big sunsets, lovely big kind of aerials, dramatic landscape shots, and then intimate stories of characters that you're following. And the score was very kind of John Williams-esque, wasn't it? So it was a very dramatic telling of these animal stories as well.
Yeah, and I think all those little elements, like you mentioned, the score was incredible. I think to this day, it's got such a somber tone to it, but still very big and very epic. It fits the tone of the show very, very well. And you've got Kenneth Branagh's narration at the time, which was again very, very powerful, very sort of authoritative, but again very somber. It's strangely quite a kind of a low energy show, despite it being very dramatic. It sort of carries this feeling of like grief. I don't know. It's an interesting idea to think about. But
there was a lot of tension. They used tension a lot, but they didn't use humour in the way that your current series, Walking with Dinosaurs, uses a lot of humour to punctuate the tension and keep you going with the story. Whereas that I didn't see a lot of humour in the original one.
No, and I think it's quite important to introduce these elements when we are going back and forth a little bit with the time, like we're hopping to the modern day and going back. I think it keeps things feeling, bouncy, if that makes sense. It gives you a nice sort of like, okay, we're going here, we're going back, but it keeps the energy up. And I think it also really helps to punctuate some of these sort of like, for example, in episode 1, you're following little baby Clover the Triceratops while she's just being pursued by this Tyrannosaurus. It's intense. And the thing is, you need something to break that up, or else it is relentless, because you feel for this little baby, and
And it's a dino eat dino world out there.
It is. There was a paleontologist said to me during production, life during the Mesozoic is cheap because dinosaurs had lots and lots of babies. Not quite like mammals do today, where an elephant will have like 1 or 2 calves. No, dinosaurs were laying like hundreds of eggs, and so for a fact that this little baby is not having a good time. So it's really, I think, important to inject those slightly more joyous, slightly more charming, fun moments into the films. And I think there's some really lovely ones. There's some, beautiful moments where babies play with each other. There's some moments where like apex predators are nuzzling each other and having social moments. There's a great moment in episode 6 where you see 2 giant long-necked sauropods do a courtship dance. It's just so silly, but it's so joyful and fun that it just kind of brings a smile to your face when you see it. I know it did in The Office at least, but hopefully it does the same for people watching at home.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Alex has filmed much more natural history than me, and getting that behaviour in a real animal is tough, but you're kind of getting the behaviour. You almost have to work out what the scientists think the behaviour would be and then fit that into a story. It's a very different way of getting to the behaviour, isn't it? Which is kind of what you want to see, is the animals just being themselves.
It is. Behaviour is such an interesting thing with dinosaurs, because behaviour doesn't always fossilise, but sometimes it does. And when it does, those are the sort of nuggets you latch onto as much as you can. Like we know for a fact some dinosaurs were doing courtship dances because we found the marks their feet have left in the ground.
Oh, wow.
We know for a fact that sometimes they fought each other because we found the tooth marks left in their bones. We know they were doing these things. And we really went to kind of like fairly extraordinary lengths to try and find every little bit of behavioral information we could about our animals. And when we couldn't find them about our animals, we used close relatives, we used modern analogs. We had to build this picture of these animals that was true to them, but also was visually dramatic and exciting.
Are there any stories you wish could have been in the show?
Yes, hundreds. I remember when we were starting out, it was the start is always the most fun, I think, because I was sitting there with our showrunner Kirsty, and we were just brainstorming idea after idea after idea, and there were so many stories that I wish we'd had the chance to explore. But you only have 6 episodes. There was one where we were thinking of a sort of penguin colony of dinosaurs, which I think would have been lovely. We were talking about, just absurd, bizarre creatures that, had all sorts of bonkers anatomy that we could introduce in various sequences, termite eating. There were all sorts of behaviors we wanted to showcase. But again, we just had 6 episodes. We had to make those work. If I had 6 more, I still wouldn't have enough space to fit all the ideas I wanted to. I've had 60 more, maybe. Who knows?
Well, series 2, let's hope you get a
fingers
series
crossed.
2 and then you'll get to explore some more. That'd be awesome.
They are sort of natural history adjacent films. But one thing it does sound like you do have is an element of artistic license. Obviously, you have your Bible of scientific information that you've put together. But you do have artistic freedom, don't you, to use your imagination a bit and bring your creativity to these characters and these scenarios.
Definitely. Yeah, that's one of the really fun parts about this kind of work. So I'm also a paleo artist because paleontology is one of the fields of science that's most closely aligned with the arts. Because when you're a paleontologist, you can't really visualize the stuff you're studying without having some degree of artistic input. A paleo artist is someone who reconstructs extinct animals using artistic ability to create, anything from illustrations to animations to VFX models, etc., etc. A work in a series like this, you have to have artistic input, because if you don't, your dinosaurs are just bones. They are bones or they are musculature models, but they lack that sort of final element you need to actually bring them to life properly. So it's really fun. It's all very much scientifically informed, but you get to have quite a bit of fun with it. One of the really fun parts is coming up with what colors are these animals. We have some of this information, and we can rely on that to sort of springboard off and look at the natural world today. Come up with what does a 8-ton predator that lives in a forest look like? We don't have that analog. We don't have any 8-ton forest-dwelling predators today, but we have a little bit of skin color information from certain dinosaurs. We have large predators today. We also know for a fact they had certain display structures. We know they have great color vision, better than any mammal today. So what does all this tell us? And based on that, we can start to, just spitball ideas, get some really fun, creative elements going. And there's a great moment in episode 3 where we've got these Utah raptor, which are grizzly bear-sized predators with feathers. And they use their brightly colored wings to distract a potential prey item, and that was really fun. But you do also have to take a little bit of artistic license in how you're depicting behaviors. We can rely a lot on the natural world today to inform us, and we can rely a lot on whatever fossils we can get our hands on. But the nuances of certain things are things we can't quite get a hold of. So, for example, like the courtship dance I mentioned, that was a lot of fun to put together because you get to choreograph 2 40-ton dinosaurs in VFX. And for a fact, we know, birds do courtship dances, reptiles do courtship dances. We know for a fact certain extinct dinosaurs did them too because we find the marks in the rock, like I mentioned. But to actually choreograph an animal requires quite a bit of, imagination because we don't know exactly how they would have done it. So we talk with our paleontologists. We try to figure out, okay, are they going to stomp their feet in sync? Do they have to match each other? Is that what birds do today? Is that what reptiles do today? And we there's a lot of imagination to it, but everything's sort of underpinned by that science. And we end up with a really quite fun and quite exciting little sequence, I think. There's definitely a video out there of me doing that exact dance. Don't know where it is, don't know who has it, but I feel like,
I need it deleted, no.
Yeah, exactly. In a few years, I'll make it onto the internet, I'm sure.
So when you're filming, you're how much kind of are you pretending to be these dinosaurs in these locations? How much you just oh no, this is just a big plate shot, you've got this list, you know exactly what you need. What does that look like?
So for the plate shoots, we obviously go out and film real world environments to then put our dinosaurs into, but we need a lot of information. The main thing, and the reason why I had to pretend to be a baby triceratops, is the camera operator and the director need to know how they actually frame up their shots. It's really hard to just do that from imagination when your animals are all sorts of shapes and sizes. We've got things ranging from the size of a little, trying to think of a small dog breed, up to a pug, up to the size of a bus or bigger. There's some of our animals are well over 10 meters tall. So it's really hard to kind of visualize that when you're behind the camera. So we do need people in front of camera pretending to be these dinosaurs, often acting out their little behaviors and things like that. making the sound effects, the facial expressions, that's not strictly necessary, but, I like to have a bit of fun with it.
You like to get method with it.
Absolutely, yeah. No. So that does help tremendously. But once you've got that pass of things, you then get a few other passes. Sometimes you need a shadow pass where someone will go across a frame with a big, cardboard sheet or something to make sure you get the kind of shadow of the animal. Sometimes if you're having the animal interact with vegetation, you'd get someone to, rustle the bushes, or, in one of our locations, we had a big blue gym ball that we just kind of dragged on a rope through a thing of ferns, and it worked out fairly well. So we have that. And then you get you still need to capture the actual information. So we have balls and charts. So you have a big reflective silver ball that captures reflection information, flip it around, and it's got a matte gray side, which will capture that information. And then you've got a color chart, and it's a whole thing. It's a whole process. And then finally, you capture what will actually be used, which is a clean plate shot where you're just filming the exact action you did 4 or 5 times prior. And that is what the VFX company will use to plop in the dinosaurs.
Wow. It's a process, isn't it? The amount of work you've all put into this is epic.
It is. It is a process. It's weird because when you're at the other end of it, looking back, you realize, oh my God, we did spend a lot of time, a lot of effort. I think everyone involved in the production really gave it their all. It's really lovely to see, actually, when I was on it, because like I said earlier, this is like a dream job for me, and I knew for a fact that I was being on it, I was not going to let myself give anything less than my full heart and soul to it. But it was so lovely to see everyone else do the same. So it was genuinely such a joy.
What's your series highlight?
So I think for me, actually, series highlight is just getting to work with all these cool paleontologists. We had a few series experts, and this is slightly embarrassing, but I had their books when I was a kid. And when I first was on a Zoom call with some of them, I was just fangirling a bit. I was like, oh my God.
Oh, bless you. That's amazing.
It was just and the fact is something, they say don't meet your heroes and all that, but it turns out they were the loveliest people. And getting to work with them and actually become friends with them. And I've made all these lovely contacts with paleontologists who are working on various places around the world who are like, oh yeah, we're going to be in the UK in a few months. Do you want to meet up? And it's such a nice thing to get to become part of their world as much as they've become part of ours. And yeah, having that bridge between what we're actually filming, the science and the people involved with it, and the TV world, it's just cool, and it's really nice.
And are the paleontologists always enthusiastic in you kind of taking their work and bringing it to life, or is there ever a little bit of skepticism about playing their work for entertainment?
It really does depend on the paleontologist. Quite a few of them, especially the ones who've worked on big kind of recognizable animals, T-Rex for example, they've seen their work kind of brought to screen in a myriad number of ways, you ranging from the sort of Jurassic Park sort of slightly monstrified animal, all the way to things like Prehistoric Planet, who depicted their animal really beautifully and very much as an animal. So for a person like that, they've seen it all. They've gone through the whole process, and they are kind of used to it to an extent, and they kind of come into it knowing it could go any one of ways. But what I have noticed is, even for them, they're tremendously appreciative of the fact that we put in the effort and that we constantly went back to them to ask them about, their thoughts on things. And even for when it came to things which were, more creative and stuff like that, we always spoke to them. And I think they really appreciated that. There are scientists who are newer to kind of working with TV, especially those working on species that are not really featured very often, for example. They tend to be extremely excited, and I'm very glad they were, because we get to bring their work to life in such a new and exciting way. It's one of my highlights for any job I do in this space. It's something I did on Earth, it's something I'm doing now on my current series, but getting to bring to life a scientist's work for the first time is so exciting. It's one of the greatest things, especially when you hear their reactions. When someone comes up to me and says, "That is incredible. You've put out the definitive interpretation of our work." That is incredible. That's such a privilege and such a beautiful moment. I'll never get tired of that.
That's wonderful. like for people coming into the industry, for people who are younger in the industry than me and Alex, like yourself, what does the industry look like now? Like, is it easy to find work? Have you managed to find yourself this niche, perhaps, using kind of your passions of art and biology and especially dinosaurs on this show? Like, has that just all worked out and you've kind of now got this wonderful path for yourself?
It is strange. It is a strange time in the industry, especially when you're starting out. I came into the industry during the pandemic. There was kind of a lot of work going around. Everyone was quite excited about things. There was a lot. And I've watched it in real time change dramatically. Like, it's been weird. And I've had the real luck of being on multiple long-term projects in a row because I have carved myself a very strange niche, but it is a niche nonetheless. And it's a useful niche because like I said, dinosaurs, extinct animals, they are a fairly timeless thing. There tend to be productions around it fairly regularly, but they're also bubbles. And I'm very aware bubbles don't always last. One thing I do tell people coming in is that being adaptable is incredibly helpful at this kind of stage of things. The industry is changing. It's not going back to the way it was. It is very, very different, and being aware of, how content is being consumed, how that's, changing in the sense of like, are people consuming it online more? How are streaming services working nowadays? It's all rapidly evolving, and it's important to keep kind of afoot of all of that. Being aware of all these different things and seeing how you fit into that landscape, I think is really important. It's something I do in my spare time where I work on my own little films, which I know are going to go online and things like that, rather than going anywhere sort of for broadcast or things like that. It's just, being aware of various different ways to make content and how that is going to kind of pan out in the future is very, very useful because it is all very unpredictable and very, very chaotic at the moment.
It is. And we are in that same boat of trying to answer those same questions for ourselves. I think everyone is. So, having made the show that inspired you, which is a very rare thing in life, let alone on the podcast, what does it mean to you now?
Now, having done this, I think I've got an even greater sort of respect and love for the original. I think that was just lightning in a bottle almost. You watch that original, and I've rewatched it all the time, obviously. But I do rewatch it all the time. And since working on this one, looking at how they made that, putting in all that effort, all that money, all that, it's just incredible. You don't get TV shows quite like that nowadays. And I still think they really pulled off something magical. I hope that what we did will inspire kids and, shape a new generation of paleontology enthusiasts or, people just wanting to get into science and fall in love with storytelling and things like that. But I can never get over the fact that that original was just unbelievably well done. Just so wonderful for the time, and not even for the time, just now. It is such an incredible piece of media. I've got such a deep love for it, and I don't think that'll ever go away. And I think it'll only get stronger the more of these shows I do, because it just goes to show how impressive it was they made that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jay.
Heat, stress, and lack of food have all but killed him. The king of the skies has lost his majesty. His life has run full circle. In his time, he traveled the globe, but death finds him here, in the very same place where he first mated some 40 years ago.
a mindless wittering production.